Okay, get around here to the front, and what we need to do is talk about Shapin's chapter here. How is it known? Okay, so like I said, this book's good, and so we left off with Newton. Newton is the culmination of this, but then Newton has introduced, with leading us in discussion, a type of re-enchantment of the cosmos by using mathematics, okay? And this is going to be problematic in the second section, because Newton, in his confidence, in the way he, we look back on Newton and the confidence we have in Newton, has sort of distorted a way of understanding how things actually work that the 17th century actually had a better handle on. And the guy who had the handle on it all was Boyle for this chapter, and I think it's good. I like it. So let's look at this. So the question is, okay, so how is it known? The first was what was known, was how is known, and the big issue is they're sure that they're doing something new. Okay, and they are doing a lot new. And so what is it that they're doing that's new? And in the newness, there's the language, the rhetoric of not following authority. See, authority comes from the past. We're doing something new. And so we're just going to do our own thing. And so, there's a lot of rhetoric, and he wants to make it be more subtle about this. This rhetoric still exists. Critical thinking on our campus. We're critical thinkers. We think for ourselves, which is this anti-authoritarian. It used to be when I was a kid, 1960s, Nixon's era and stuff, the bumper stickers say question authority, Well, yeah, but, okay, we have to have a much more subtle understanding of authority and what is worth changing into something new and what is not, and then what is actually new and what's not. So this is what he's trying to do, and so he wants you to be careful, and he points this out, and the ways we look at this, and there's some really good stuff in here about here we have, no 17th century modernist maxim seems more self-evidently sound than these. Rely not on the testimony of humans, but on the testimony of nature. Favor things over words as sources of knowledge. Prefer the evidence of your own eyes and your own reason to that which others tell you. Here is the root idea of modern empiricism. The view that proper knowledge is and ought to be derived from direct sense experience. And here too are the foundations of modern mistrust of the social aspects of knowledge making. See, this is like this critical line between sort of what he's getting at with postmodernism, sociology of knowledge, an understanding that knowledge is never pure, that it has social context, and people actually have assumptions and stuff that are going into this and things like that. So to get he's seeing this as a rhetoric that comes down to us from the 17th century, which we tend to be so easily affirming of. Critical thinking is so good. We're supposed to teach people to critical thinkers. This is a big problem in the modern world, is we have basically been shooting ourselves in the foot for 200 years with this critical thinking. Now, and what Shapin is saying is that, hey, let's understand this better. Critical thinking is good within certain contexts, especially understanding authority and things like that. So this idea of empiricism, my own experience, what's actually in nature, don't trust books, don't trust people. Okay, enough said. All right, and then what this does, I wrote my little note to myself here. This is this dang idea. Every time you read a scientific biography, they're all heroes. Scientists think of themselves as big people with S on their chest. You know, there's a science for heroes, man. Individualism, empiricism, we're finding certainty. That's what this chapter is saying. Hey, back off, guys. Boyle is actually someone to take, he likes Boyle, and I like Boyle. Okay, there's probably no other sensibility that is more strongly linked 17th century and late 20th century moderns, you see that's his point here, than the recommendation of intellectual individualism and the rejection of trust and authority. Yet the rhetoric of individual empiricism was neither unalloyed nor self-evident for our early modern guys. So once again, and this I love being a historian, is when we go back into history, those guys are actually in many ways both wiser and on methodical issues, smarter than us. Go back and read Boyle. And Boyle is not someone to just sort of, yeah, he led to me, which is the way modern history of science goes. Boyle just one step toward me is, no, go back and read Boyle. Boyle is not one step toward you because you're not near as good as he was. He really understood some categories and such that you don't. Okay. Oh, we love history in this class. History should be taught more. You history majors, we love you guys, man. All right, so this is the thing of this. And, you know, there's this very interesting, this guy, Peter Deere, wrote a book, Experience and Experiment. This is just a fascinating sort of thing. There's the people's general experience and then a contrived experiment. And where do you place authority? You know, and this becomes a sort of distinction between England and the continent. It has to do with some other things that go on too. There's, Peter Deere writes a great book about the Jesuits, and you know they're big into this. But you know, this is what is an important distinction. It's like it's not obvious that an experiment is the way to build knowledge. Okay, and so he then goes into discussion of how, you know, experiments began to be, you know, there have to be ways and means to make an experiment count as knowledge. All right, when the 17th century moderns recommended doing away with authority, they generally had in view the traditionally established authority of Aristotle and Socrates. Modern enterprises in no way dispense with the reliance on authority. Authority actually is what gives your experiments authority, you know. You don't just sort of do a scientific experiment and then it automatically has authority. No, it has to go through, as we have journals, peer review, we have all sorts of other things that go on today. So there's these issues of probability and certainty, you know, which are crucial. It's a great paragraph here, how the word probable changes this in this little footnote. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But, you know, what we want to do here is then look at, like, okay, so the power of God and spiritual agencies in the natural order was freely acknowledged, but in the view of Boyle and his colleagues, the scope of natural philosophy was to be circumscribed. See, that's the key to Boyle and the Boylean group, you know, is they understand, is so we're not tossing the baby out with the bathwater. We are narrowly focusing. So natural philosophy, natural science, especially this empirical method, is good for these things, carefully considered. Okay? And so then what happens is that other people blur these distinctions. Okay? So in search of this name philosophy, natural philosophy, a practice could not affect Boylean caution. See, just could not. These philosophers, man, they just want to say the big thing without the caution of the natural mechanical philosophy, the experimental methods, boundaries that Boyle created. or Boyle advocated for, okay? So you go down here. Through the 1670s, the broadly Boylean experimental and natural historical program continued to characterize the Royal Society. See, the Royal Society was this institution to bring authority together by groups of people affirming each other's experiments and very carefully considering sort of a peer review type of thing. And then and in fact, Boyle himself expressed serious reservations about, that's what Newton is doing. That's that stuff from the last paragraph where you're introducing a type of occult, a type of, and so, this is a fight back and forth. And it is, this is the fun thing, is Boyle's law, which he's famous for, he didn't call it a law. Boyle wouldn't call it a law because law is a very presumptive term. You're gonna like step into, Boyle's a very deeply Christian in the sense that God can do miracles, God does all this other sort of stuff. So law isn't necessarily law, by Boyle standards. And then he doesn't even use mathematical notation or anything like that. Okay, and so this is the conclusion. Here's the conclusion. And so theoretically cautious and experience-based conception of science, and that's Boyle, here is juxtaposed to the deployed mathematical as well as the experimental tools to claim certainty. See, this search for certainty. Diffidence, which is humility, was opposed to ambition. And this is where Newton is ambitious and Boyle is humble. Okay, to give this some context, and we'll do the next one is just this is very, very good stuff, and we're back to this never pure notion that the certainty people, the sort of natural philosophy people that he's writing about, the people who are touting the sort of powers of mathematics are folks who tend to create, and we'll talk about this in the 19th century, this word objectivity, like somehow you're objective. Other people are subjective, we're objective. These are later, more 19th century terms. They don't, neither one's true. There is no such thing as a purely objective person. There's no there's no purely subjective person. We're going to talk about this. But so nothing's pure. Get away from that purity stuff. And so what you have in the 17th century is some very interesting stuff going on in which science is separating itself from other types of thinking. And one of the major ways of thinking is in terms of law, judicial thinking. And so natural science is becoming more scientific. Judicial remains very much in certain tracks, but they're both seeking certainty. And I wanted to just throw out this for you. This great books. This woman, Barbara Shapiro, taught at Berkeley Law School and also I think in the Berkeley History Department. I guess she didn't teach undergraduates. But she wrote, this is a great book. All three of these are great books. Probability and Certainty in 17th Century England. Now notice, a study of relationships between natural science, religion, history, law, and literature. Much broader concept. And Shapiro would I would think very much like, Shapin, I think very much like Shapiro's book. Shapiro's book's written before Shapin, this one. Probability, beyond reasonable doubt, probable cause. This is much more legal. Beyond reasonable doubt, historical perspectives on Anglo-American law of evidence, you see? And so evidence in a courtroom is different than evidence at the Royal Society. Mostly in this situation, the most bold thing is you can't do these sort of experiments in a courtroom. You have to rely on testimony. In a Royal Society, you can have much more a evidence-based empiricism or something. So, and then here's one of her later books, Culture of Fact. And this is England, and this is what the chapter's about, is Shapir's, Boyle, Newton, they're all struggling with what are facts? How do you get at facts? And there's different kinds of facts, different ways to get at facts, and things like that. I give you this book here, Testimony. This book came out 1992. Shapiro's, I think, is 94 or something. So I think this is before Shapiro's Boyle book. But maybe not. Maybe a Boyle book maybe came before this. I don't know. Whatever. But this is a philosopher down in Australia, C.A.J. Cody. And this is a great book because what he does is he points out that if you look at disciplines today, they all use testimony in a variety of ways. Science is heavily oriented toward people testifying. If you read your science textbooks and stuff, most of the stuff you're doing, you're not redoing experiments. You're actually believing people who tell you that these experiments have been done. Things like this, and which gets at these thought experiments and stuff that Shapiro was talking about. Very powerful book to show you that, here again, in this sort of postmodern critique of the certainty of modernism, this language, this rhetoric of getting rid of testimony and authority is not very deep. Let's just say that. It's not bad. It's just not deep. It's not very wise in understanding the true range of the way things work. And this is the sort of stuff which I came into when I was doing this book. This came out in '95, and I was looking at these just a very minor league book. But the thing is that it's even embarrassing to put it next to something. But the thing is that you see in logic, and especially in places like Harvard and Puritan Harvard and stuff like that, they're struggling with these ideas of certainty and probability, these ideas of mathematization of qualities, the power of an experiment, how much authority you get rid of, what does the term faith mean, and what are the different... Shapiro writes on really good stuff about the separation of moral certainty from sort of like vague certainty down into sort of mere probabilities and stuff like this. And this is the sort of stuff that the 17th century is struggling with. And as he points out, when you get to the 20th century, and that's what this book points out, that the rhetoric of 20th century academics, especially the rhetoric of 20th century social sciences, hard sciences, philosophy, is very, very superficial in comparison to the 17th century. So that's a good chapter, and we're going to now go into that third chapter. But think on this. Hopefully, this stuff should ruminate within you and come out as you hear things. Especially in the science says, that do this, or be careful, and then at the same time be wise. How do we actually negotiate as intellectual people within this intellectual culture? It is not easy.